Hello, and welcome to Question in a Bottle. In this series of short discussions, private investor Mark Atkinson answers questions sent in by listeners and subscribers to his main podcast, The Desert Island Investor. So, let's take a look and see what's in the bottle that washed up on the beach today.
Right, Paul, this is a very small bottle, which is washed up on the beach. It contains a very small piece of paper. It's about the size of a postcard from Jim Doherty. And on one side is the description of a person who lives in the city and works hard, but who's desperate to one day retire early and live with us on the island. It explains that this person knows nothing about investing and asks for advice and tips. On the opposite side of the card are 5 lines, numbered 1 to 5. And it said, what would be your 5 pieces of advice? Paul, we met Jim and his mate Stuart at the Fundsmith seminar earlier this year in Manchester. And Jim has been very supportive of what we do. Thanks, Jim. Well, this is where I can bring the subjects of Fundsmith and giving advice and tips together and share with you, Jim, that I regularly send suggestions, analysis, advice and tips across to Terry Smith out in Mauritius. Now, I fully expect that this will impress you, Jim, but I have to add that he's recently just sent them all back to me with a note saying, please stop bothering me or I'll be forced to contact the police. When it comes to tips, we stress that we're not tipsters and in our disclaimer that we do not give financial advice, but I think it's safe to touch on some broad themes. And if you are young and you want to join us on Investor Island, really, I can explain how I did it. So there are numerous skills and qualities that come into play, and these often don't have a hard edge as they blend and merge into something else. But you've restricted me to just 5, Jim, and I'll try my best and probably pitch them as broad aspects. Number 1, before you even get started, take responsibility. Nobody else is going to be as concerned as much about your welfare as what you are. Now, it may be an inconvenient truth, but nobody is going to come to your rescue. The full rate of the new UK state pension, I looked up, I think it's £221.20 per week, which is £11,502.40 a year. And you have to wait until you're 66 or 67 for that. And the direction of travel is for this retirement age to be pushed back. Now, your plan may be to work all your life and then attempt to live to this level. And I would suggest that your lifestyle would hardly be lavish. And also that not everybody is lucky enough to be fit enough or indeed to be able to live that long to retirement age. A great lie out there is that we are all living longer. Not everybody is. I thought to just talk a little bit about the journey of pensions. Now, the first Pensions Act was in 1908 and available only to those over 70 and deemed of good character. So I don't know if Paul and I would actually meet that criteria. And previously, the only provision was through charity. Now, back then, 1908, as you can imagine, the medical development was basic. And more people worked in demanding physical activities. Can you imagine hacking away with a pickaxe at a seam of coal at 69 after starting probably at 12 years of age and breathing coal dust in for all those years with an occasional ceiling collapse? Now, the reason for people retiring at 70 wasn't out of any great altruism. They were of little or no economic use anymore. They'd served their useful purpose, and they were broken down by age and attritional professions. And a pension would enable them to survive at a base level until they finally shuffled off, probably in short order. So over time, the state pension was successively extended, with national insurance contributions paying for the current retirees. And we also had lots of companies with workplace pensions based on final salary. When I started work, retirement age was 65 for men and 60 for women. And it's hard to believe that today that such blatant sexism existed. A lot of those manual jobs were replaced by office or service roles or people who were using machinery instead of wielding that pick that I mentioned. So medical advances came along, and instead of being crippled and using sticks, people were given new knees, hips. We've got heart bypasses, keyhole surgery instead of something resembling a shark bite, all kinds of cancer treatments. Every aspect has improved, and people are also more health aware, and that's resulting in a long-term decline in smoking. So as a result, on average, we're living longer, and the phrase early retirement, it became part of the everyday conversation. In 2022, the average life expectancy in the UK for men was 78.6 and 82.6 for women. Now, that's just the average. The lucky ones who retired early and had good health could perhaps expect a retirement of between 30 and 40 years. So the concept of retirement changed from one of a bare existence to a new beginning, an adventure, quality time to pursue your dreams and attack that bucket list. And now people are dying with or because of dementia or Alzheimer's because other things weren't killing us first. So actuaries realised that the pensions received were too generous and unsustainable relevant to the expanding life expectancy, and there's needed to be a correction. Now, the state retirement age has been put back, and with private pensions, annuities, which were the most common form before the George Osborne freedoms were introduced, saw a reduction in yields. Now, in addition, the age that you can also take your private pension is being put back to 57. I think that is in 2028. And I'm not sure really what the rationale is. You know, perhaps somebody can tell us. I can understand the strain on the state pension, but a private pension is always set aside. It's money that's physically there. So perhaps the goal is precisely to prevent people from retiring and still keep them contributing to income tax and national insurance, despite most having reached that 35-year NI ceiling. So those final salary pension schemes now have largely disappeared. This is, of course, unless you work for the state. The public sector is not prone to the same forces of Darwinism. My wife, Elaine, she receives a very nice pension from her service with the NHS. And you could describe the difference between the public and the private sectors as being something of a parallel universe. According to the ONS, in June 2024, 17.9% worked in the public sector and 82.1% in the private sector. So why can the public sector still afford those much more attractive pensions? These are guaranteed. Well, you could argue that the private sector are bled to pay for the public sector final salary pensions that they themselves do not enjoy. So I was tempted to pick as one of my 5, Jim, get a job in the public sector. In short, we've had a recalibration. The playing field has got tougher, and we're returning more to that working until you've exceeded your usefulness. Number 2, start early. The biggest factor in why I'm here today is that I started investing at 18. The earlier you start, the longer you've got for that compounding to work its magic. The longer you wait to start, the steeper the incline that you're running against. Now, I wasn't a great investor when I started off. I've improved. I wasn't a big hitter. I did okay, but by starting early, and that compounding factor meant that over time, in terms of wealth, I went past who were better paid than me, more qualified than me, and better educated than me. Number 3, invest as much as you're comfortable with. Now, time is a factor, but if there's nothing to multiply, then you're going to struggle. If you start early, those insignificant trifles have the time to multiply. But the more that you can set aside, then you naturally increase your chances of reaching your end goal and reaching it quicker. I've used the phrase comfortable with, and I think that life is a balance. I've always had an eye on tomorrows, but I've also enjoyed the todays. And that lie of we're all living longer. I had one really good friend. He didn't get to 30. And I knew one exponent of FIRE, which is the concept of financial independence, retire early. He saved aggressively. He was a customer of mine, and every time we met, he talked of this golden retirement that he had ahead of him. He never made it, did Mike. So, yes, make some sacrifices, but don't become a slave to it. Don't build your own prison. Life's about experiences. Number 4, become a student. Do the research. Read on and around a subject. Become as good as you can be. Work on your game and constantly try and improve. Put some quality time aside. Some time ago, an investor asked me a question about what I thought about Fundsmith, and I sent him a link to the podcast we just recorded. It's about half an hour long. And he immediately came back and said, yeah, but what do you think? I said, listen to the podcast. I'd attended the annual shareholder meeting, researched the fund. Paul and I recorded and produced it. And then he can't even put half an hour aside. And he wanted a review probably in a single word. Probably buy, sell or hold. Now, when I go on holiday, I see middle-aged men reading things like Gareth Southgate's autobiography. Now, and I wonder, are they learning about how to be the next England football manager? The better you are, the better chance of this being reflected in your performance of your portfolio. And just say a 0.5% improvement in your annual long-term performance, when compounded over this long period of time, will make a massive difference. So all these three knit together, starting early and the time to compound, the more you can set aside, and that long-term performance. And then lastly, number 5, know yourself. You could call this self-awareness, and there's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect that I suggest you look at. And it's about how really bad we are at judging our own abilities. It's a cognitive bias whereby we overestimate our abilities. And you can take as an example, most people think that they're an above average driver. Well, this clearly can't be right. And having ill-found confidence in your knowledge and skill and understanding can be very dangerous when it involves apportioning your own capital. Know your limitations. Yeah, but work on them, and don't be frightened to turn to people who know more than you on a specific subject. You can seek counsel from as many different sources as you wish, but ultimately the decisions are down to yourself. And also, don't underestimate your abilities. Many of us are familiar with the imposter syndrome. We're often the last one to enter an established group, and we think that everybody must know more than us. And after a while, we discover that this isn't the case. So a lot of investors defer to others and wrongly put more credence in a sure tip than a sure tip with little supporting material than their own deeper research. So they assume that somebody that writes a blog or dare I say, records a podcast has some superior knowledge. And a favourite of mine is that the all that people hold somebody in is when they've written a book. It might well have been self-published, and they might not have actually sold any copies of it, but they've written a book. Now, when somebody issues a tip, they don't know how that complements the rest of your portfolio. They've no vision as to what depth or commitment you should make. They don't know your attitude to risk or your time horizons, etc., etc. And that's why Paul and I thought Progressive Equity Research was an ideal fit for us. Like us, they're not tipsters. They've got an array of analysts that produce in-depth research, and it's incumbent upon the reader to use this together with other information available to come to their own decision. And this is, in my opinion, there's more value in this than just a thumbnail couple of paragraphs with buy, sell, or hold in bold type. So, Jim, that's how I've done things. If it doesn't work, come and see me in another 40 years' time. So I'll just run through the five I've come up with that I did. 1, take responsibility. 2, start early. 3, invest as much as you're comfortable with. 4, become a student. And 5, know yourself.
Well, that's all for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember the content is for information only and it is not financial advice. If you have a question for Mark for our Question in a Bottle podcast, just complete the form on our website, thedesertislandinvestor.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.